friends don't let friends develop in production. And that's just as true when it comes to Agentforce. So very lucky that managed to get Lawrence Boyce from Gearset and Jack Lavis from Elements together to talk about how we've been implementing agents inside Elements, but actually how we've been using Gearset to deploy them and actually drive that scale those deployments at scale. Because one of the things we've heard from agents is that we're going to iterate really quickly. So Jack's CIO at Elements.cloud, been in the ecosystem probably 5 years now, but is driving has got a team who not only are implementing Salesforce and HubSpot and other applications internally, but also has been focused on Agentforce and is actually driving a lot of the thinking around how to deliver agents effectively. So also we'll be out at TDX, so if there's an opportunity if you're there, then an opportunity to hear him speak. Lawrence, been in the ecosystem for a while, both own backup and now actually doing some great work at Gearset. So delighted to have you on board as well, Lawrence. So first of all, Jack, can I pass over to you? You did a great webinar last time with Miriam McCabe. She's head of global innovation for Salesforce Professional Services. The two of you talked about how you, but also Salesforce Professional Services, were building agents. Now, I don't want you to reiterate that. People can go and watch that webinar, but could you give us a summary of what you went through so at least everyone on the call has level set, so we're all at the point where we understand what best practice is around how you build agents?
Yeah, of course. So thank you, Ian, for the introduction. Very kind. I'll come on to the detail with this slide in a moment, but I kind of want to set a little bit of a scene first to give you context of how we ended up to where we are with this design, build, and govern framework. So I think when Agentforce landed on my desk and it became my sole responsibility with my team in the business to deliver working, reliable, trusted agents, etc. I think I had a bit of a thinking time where I came back from Dreamforce. I was getting all of these ideas about agents from my stakeholders. There's a real buzz in the office, rightly so. This is very cool technology. But I sat down and went, how do I get all of these ideas from my stakeholders around agents to something that makes sense in Agentforce? People have been ideating for decades. So your whiteboard sessions, putting ideas up on whiteboards, we're really good at that. Agentforce is slightly different in that we're being told it's all natural language. So how do I go from my ideas to sensible natural language instructions, which then means I get a reliable agent? And that's basically where we landed at this design, build, and govern framework with metadata at the heart, if you like. So there's two real key questions that when I was going through this, and Ian, you were part of this discussion at Elements, was one, we didn't want to slow down the building of an agent because Salesforce, again, rightly saying these agents are fast, they're easy. They are if you go through this design, build, and govern framework, and we've been there, we've experienced it. The first agent we built internally, for example, I gave it to somebody in my team who joined the business maybe 5 to 6 months ago, completely new to IT, completely new to Salesforce, probably never heard of Salesforce 5 to 6 months ago. And I said, look, these ideas that we're getting from our stakeholders, take a use case and kind of proof this methodology that we're going through with design, build, and governance. And he took those ideas, applied this approach, and built the agent. First time around, it was working, it was reliable, we trusted it, we put it into production, our end users are using it today, which is absolutely brilliant. And we kind of calculated we're looking at about 10 times faster because we followed this iterative process. And I think that's the key in the framework itself, is it's iterative. And you're going to be iterating so many times at real speed that one, you need to understand what you're iterating on. So what, for example, is the process an agent needs to go through. Two, you need to understand the versioning. So what instructions are you using inside the agent? Have they changed from when you initially sat down with your stakeholders? what are your test utterances when you're testing, and that's part of your build. And then once you've done that, if you start to get unreliable answers, this is where the governance comes in. So again, coming back to your process, coming back to your design, so you're going round this circle multiple times at speed, you should then get to a working and trusted agent. And I mean, I think it's fair to say we've now got multiple topics in production working off of one agent. We've iterated around this loop multiple times. So for the book of vacation, the one I showed on the last webinar, we've probably been around this loop 5 to 6 times, but we have the confidence that it's reliable and that it's working. So that's a high level summary of where we got to.
So why did you go around 5 or 6 times? Is it because you got it wrong, or so? Answer that question first, and then let's think about what do we call about it? Is it like a cycle every 2 or 3 days, every week? How's that work?
I wouldn't say we got it wrong. I think it was more that there were 2 things. One was when we first started on the journey, it was trying to understand how we took those ideas into design. Because like I said, we were basically getting all these ideas and we're trying to mold them into natural language instructions for the agent. So arguably we got it wrong, but it wasn't wrong as such. It was just more unreliable. We weren't getting the responses back from the agent that we wanted or that we felt confidence to go and give it to our end users internally. So that's one reason why we went around multiple times. But again, we also found when testing that sometimes within the process, we were probably trying to over-engineer, which can also be quite dangerous because we wanted this conversation to flow like a conversation between 2 humans. We as humans, we're used to interacting with humans. So let's try and make it feel like we're interacting with a human. Sometimes we put too many check this with the end user, whereas it just needed to flow like a conversation. So there's also that danger as well. We didn't want to over-engineer.
Jack, I'm curious, when you started, of course, some of Salesforce's benefit here and with agents is that speed of iteration and how quickly you can update and ship updates to those agents. When you formulated out those use cases, was part of that iteration around this loop regarding the fact that maybe you didn't try to make them too complex too early? Maybe you gave them a very basic set of tasks and iterated on top, or how did you approach that?
Really good question. So I think the first bit of advice would be start small. The worst thing you can do is you hear about Agentforce. It's it's on LinkedIn. You're hearing about all these use cases in the business, or that people are starting to develop in their businesses. And I think we started small on something that's not particularly complex. So the first one, for example, was an FAQ agent. It was for our HR policies. And we started small because we wanted to understand what we could actually do with Agentforce without going too big too soon. You go too big too soon, you're just going to get swallowed up and you're going to get consumed. And mentally, if I went too big too soon, mentally, I probably would have gone, this is just too hard. There's too much going on. There's too many moving parts. Let's park it to one side and I'll come back to this. So it's very much starting off with a simple use case, but also think about your use cases where they're low risk, particularly if you're going external. So if you're going customer facing with your agent, all of our agent and our topics are internal currently. So I've looked at it and I've gone, okay, I have a simple use case and I've tried to build myself up. How do I go that next step further? And then by doing that, the level of complexity goes up and I need to go around this design, build and govern cycle. But I'm also teaching myself and my team that, okay, try to build up. Don't go up here because you're just going to get convoluted and completely confused.
So can you show us something or talk us through this cycle? Because at the moment it's very high level. It's like arm waving. But have you got something? What you talked about vacation or one of those examples or something that just makes a bit more sense to this relatively quickly?
Yeah, cool. So if I go through the simple use case first, so there it is. This is it's a UPN diagram, so it's a process. So think about those 3 steps. So design, build, govern. We're very much sitting in the design phase at the moment. Okay, so this is part of of a diagram with several levels up, which I can go into in a moment around organizing topics, but I don't want to overcomplicate the processes so far. So what you're looking at here is a job to be done topic process. So this is our HR FAQ process. And it's as simple as a user has a question about a HR policy. The agent then has 3 actions. So the gold boxes are your actions. And it's basically ask a question from the end user. The agent then has a little bit of work to do to go, okay, where is that user based geographically? Are they in the UK? Are they in the US? And then dependent on that finding from the agent, because all that data is stored in Salesforce, so it has access to all that data. It then answers the question again from a UK or US perspective, so it has the context of the question and all the data it's finding. So this for us was step 1. This was our simple use case. It was question, go and find where they are geographically, answer the question. Not particularly complex, but we wanted to start small and then we were going to build on top.
So you just said, hang on, the gold things are actions. So pink or purple are the instructions, but
Right.
what are the actions? What metadata are the actions?
Okay, so the first action here where we're finding the country of the user, that's a flow. You can attach metadata to these boxes. So the great thing about the Elements platform is, you know, you during your UPN and you're designing, you can actually start to design your metadata that you want to build. So remember that circle, we had metadata in the middle. Well, this is what we're trying to do here. So we're saying, okay, we're going to need a flow for the action, the agent, to go and find the country of the user who's asking that question. Okay, so that's a flow. We've then got prompt templates for UK and US, completely separate prompt templates. These are actually using Data Cloud. So I said it's fairly simple. There is a level of complexity from a technical perspective. We didn't have to use Data Cloud at the time, if I'm being completely honest, and this is maybe where we went wrong. I thought we had to use Data Cloud, which was really interesting because later learnings, you don't have to, you just have it turned on. So here we're using Data Cloud. If I was to do this tomorrow, Ian, I probably wouldn't use Data Cloud. I'd use a prompt template just with all the information inside the prompt template because it's even lower complexity just to get us moving.
I'm really curious here, Jack. You mentioned around this is referencing some flows, and of course, there's clearly a dependent nature going on here. Were these new metadata pieces that you had to build for the, let's say, the flows in this example, or were you able to leverage existing pieces? And what's best practice there in this sort of design, build, govern phase?
Really good question again. So but best practice from a technical debt perspective, because I can see in 3 to 6 months, 8, 9, when we start building these topics and building these agents and we become comfortable, I think the natural reaction is going to be to go and build a new flow or build a new prompt template, have a new piece of metadata. Best practice in my mind is try to reuse metadata first, purely because you don't want to build up this bank of tech debt. I mean, we've seen it internally. You know, we have flows across the business. We have technical debt. Who doesn't, right? I mean, even Elements, who has the platform to go and clean up tech debt, we still have tech debt. It's the way it is. However, there are some instances where you have to create new flows. So, for example, I'm just going to move on one slide. So if you've been watching our webinars or any of our content online, you would have seen this probably 100 times. This is our book a vacation process. So the flows in this, so we prior to this being live, we had a HR system where we had screen flows. People could go in and they could try to book a vacation through a screen flow and it pings off an approval process to a line manager. I wanted to go one step further with Agentforce. So it felt like the perfect use case because it's low risk. We already had operational processes. There was no time pressure to deliver because there was something to fall back on. We have a booking a vacation process. But coming back to the question, here I had to recreate new flows because you can't use screen flows, or you couldn't at the time. I don't know if you can now. I need to double check that, inside a topic. So there may be some times where you're forced to create a new action. And if you do that, attach the metadata within the process so you know there's that dependency there. So it completely depends on the scenario and the topic you're trying to build.
Suddenly, an understanding about which Agentforce metadata is being reused, which flows are being reused, where a prompt template. This is not about every time you build an agent, you build more metadata. That's not what we're talking about. But it suddenly does put pressure on like good dependency analysis, good design up front, good conflict checking. You can't just be out there. I mean, there are now AI products out there goes, we can build an object really quickly for you. Fantastic. You can now build technical data even faster. That's kind of not what we're aiming for here. This is about how do we get through that cycle quickly, but in a measured way, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly, which is why coming back to that cycle, your metadata sits in the middle because you're trying to do it in a governed way. Okay, we want to do it fast because we don't want to slow down this approach. That's part of the beauty of Agentforce. But your metadata and your dependency analysis, even to creating stories, if you want that level of complexity in your implementation cycle, it's so important as we are going to move to multi-topic and multi-agent landscapes. It's going to happen. Agents are here, they're not going away. So start to think about your metadata at the earliest stage possible, because you're going to need to know where that's being used down the line.
So one of the points you made earlier was about data cloud. Not you need to switch it on because you need it because it's tracking the Agentforce events essentially. But you said you don't need to use it. But we have implemented data cloud internally anyway for other uses. But could you just talk about, if you can, some use cases where you think you would go beyond just having data cloud switched on and you'd need to use it versus not needing to use it?
Yeah, of course. So one of the big use cases on our roadmap for Agentforce and Data Cloud is, so we've got we use product experienced software called Gainsight, right? So we want to, if I can see in time where our CSMs or our account managers, even our product managers, might want to understand the product usage behind an account or a contact in Salesforce. So at the moment, as we've implemented in Data Cloud, we're bringing that product usage data in through the ingestion into a DMO, and we can actually then bring all that data back into a related list inside Salesforce. So we have that data in Salesforce. There is going to come a time where a CSM or an AE is going to come knocking on my desk going, Jack, I'd love to be able to talk to an agent and try to get that. Because for them, it's, okay, I've got to build a report, or I have to go find the data. Why can't I just talk to an agent where it can go find that information for me? I mean, we built a custom GPT in, so we've done it. We just need to bring it into Agentforce. And that is where we're starting to bring the Data Cloud data really to life in terms of inside.
So that's quite a complex example where you're pulling together different data sources. I mean, that for us, that was a reasonably complex data cloud project, which your team delivered on. But also, if you're simply using a data cloud vector database because you've got a series of policies as PDFs, you're going to use data cloud for that, aren't you?
Yeah, so that's what we did with the HR stuff. So the policies are sitting in the knowledge. So inside your agent, you can upload PDF knowledge documents, and then basically all you're doing is you're building a prompt template which has a retriever to go get that document once the prompt injection is there to go and find, so it knows a document it needs to go and retrieve from that knowledge. So we're doing that today. It's a level of complexity up from just putting the information inside a prompt template. But sometimes, I mean, I think a prompt template has a character limit of about 5,000 characters. So if you have a massive, like company handbooks, really good example. Our company handbook is more than 5,000 characters. I'd love to just put it into a prompt template, but I have to use the knowledge to go and get that information.
So let me try and summarize. So if you're doing something which doesn't require, you could just use a prompt template and embed any of the text in there, or it's an action, then data cloud needs to be switched on just because it's logging.
Yeah, exactly.
Then want to use, I guess the next level of complexity is that I want to use a vectorized database because I've got a PDF and I need to have access to that. So that's the next level. If you then want to ground the agent in some of your customer data, then you may need to use Data Cloud for that, particularly if the data is coming from disparate systems, which is what the power of Data Cloud is. So I guess
Exactly.
you can walk your way into more and more Data Cloud complexity. But I think, Lawrence, you said earlier when you were asking the question, which is you've got to start simple. Let's not, if your first Agentforce implementation involves a Data Cloud implementation, then it's suddenly a way bigger, and there are so many more moving parts. So let's keep this fairly simple.
Exactly. And with the, regardless of the complexity, always go through that design, build, and govern. It doesn't matter how complex your use case is. If it's the most simple use case or the most complex, still go through that cycle, because it's going to speed you up and it's going to get you to a reliable agent at the end.
So this diagram is very pretty, but so what?
So, sorry, say so what?
Yeah. What are you going to do with it?
Good question. So from here, you can then, so the biggest issue, again, coming back to that story at the beginning, was all these ideas, scrambling it into a natural instruction for the agent. What we're doing here is think of this as your visual, it's the planning document for your topic. So from here, you can then go and generate those natural language instructions. So inside of Elements, we have on the right-hand panel, I can show you a bit later in a demo if you'd like me to. You can then generate your natural language instructions from this particular diagram, and you can paste them straight into Agent Builder. You can generate test utterances. So suddenly you're actually testing against the business context and the process the agent is going through, and you understand that, which is really important when you're testing, because you're trying to have a conversation. It's not just unit testing. So the so what comment is that this is the planning document for your topic. Every time we change these instructions, every time we add a box or a line on that particular process map, we're bringing back in a level of governance as well. So let's skip forward a few steps. You're testing your agent, you have your instructions, unreliable response. Natural reaction is I'm going to go into Agent Builder and I'm going to update my instructions, because that's where the agent instructions live. I get it. Don't do that, because you're going, as soon as you change a word in those instructions, you're going to lose a level of governance, and you're not going to know where you are in 3 or 4 or 5 iterations time. And that's where this circle finishes with governance. Change your instructions in the diagram. Your diagram is the instructions.
But you also said you can generate all the test paths off this, which is really important, because actually as the instructions, or as you iterate this, then the testing, what you're going to use for testing is going to change. Your understanding about what you may add a new gold box, which means suddenly you've got more metadata that you need to go. There's a user story you've generated that you now need to go and build some more, add some metadata of some sort. So I think
exactly
that looking at this, I think the other one is this is visual. You can engage your business users and go, is this what you want us to do? And you've also got some fault paths. I think I see a lot of demos where it's just the happy path. They build an agent. There's one prompt that works, and if you stray off that happy path, it doesn't work. Here we've got lots of feedback going on. That's not working. That's not working. And I think trying to do that in instructions is really hard. I think this visual approach. I mean, that's why Miriam for again, Salesforce Professional Services said this is an approach which works for them and it works for their customers.
Exactly. And as we went through this cycle, Ian, it was very much okay. So we've delivered on one use case, the simple. We've now delivered on the second use case, which is the book a vacation. It has a level of complexity higher. There's more actions, like you said. There's more fault paths. And then I really wanted to challenge my team. So it's very much, okay, here's a list of use cases. Go and choose the most complex thing you can find. And we basically came up with this.
Oh, wow.
So this on one screen, it's end to end. So look, I'm going to go through it in a moment in high level detail. But this is basically It's our discovery framework sales coach. So again, we've posted this. There's some videos on LinkedIn. There's stuff on our academy. Go and check it out. But this is us going, okay, the AEs came to us and went, it would be really good if an agent can give us feedback on our calls with our prospects, our clients, start to score me on our discovery framework. So we have this discovery framework in the business. It's where they're engaging with their clients and they have to talk about their business challenges, root causes, and how us as a product can help them solve those challenges. And the VP of sales was very much, it would be really, I want some insight into how my guys are doing around the discovery framework, even himself. So we've basically gone, let's sit down, let's ideate. We came up with this process. We sat down with the AE, so there were going to be no surprises later. They knew what we were delivering. And going through the process, so up front, it's basically conversational, sales rep, ask the agent, can you get the call transcript for the recent call I had with Gearset? Okay. We then have actions. The actions are basically going to get the call transcript from Einstein Conversation Insights, which is sitting inside Salesforce, so the data is there. It gets the call transcript, and then we have another couple of actions where we're then starting to provide a score based off of the conversational context of that transcript. So the agent's going, okay, I recognize these words. This is part of root cause. This is part of business challenge. I'm going to score them a 2 out of 5, for example, in root cause. And this is where the agent really comes into its own at the back end. So that when you mention multiple paths, there's fault paths. The agent's doing what an agent's designed to do at this point, but it's following a strict business context process that we're giving it, right? So the sales rep can then say, look, train me how I can do better with this call. So a role play kicks off, a scenario. It's not just any random scenario that the agent's gone and found through the LLM. It's using the context of the call transcript. It has knowledge of the score, so it knows where this sales rep is weak in terms of discovery framework. It will tailor the role play to that score. And it's effectively coaching this sales rep through to then get to a better discovery call at the end. And then the bottom path is basically, if they don't have time for a role play because AEs are busy, they can then go, okay, tell me more about root cause, give me my knowledge gaps, where can I do better? And it just gives them a summarized information. And we're then saving it in a training record at the end for the line manager to then go look at. So this is an example of, we've gone from simple complexity, book a vacation being a middle, through to, right, let's really challenge ourselves here. And again, design, build, and govern. We delivered this in a week. Somebody that didn't know Salesforce 5 months ago. And that's a genuine statement. 1 week, this was delivered. And it's working, and people are using it today.
And that probably speaks to that design, build, and govern, right, Jack? Going around that cycle, delivering them and shipping them ultimately at speed. And I'm really interested around, you say you've got this simple, more complex, and then as difficult as you can get use case. These are all internal, as you mentioned. So what is your sort of strategy or plan for anything external? Are you keeping it internal for now? What blockers are you seeing to that adoption, if any? What are your thoughts around that?
So we have an external use case in mind. I think for us at the moment, and Ian, you might want to speak to this as well as CEO, but it's very much, for us, it was, when we started the journey, it was kind of dipping our toe into what Agentforce can do. We then suddenly realized that using the UPN approach of the diagram was, okay, we found a way here where we can really help people build reliable agents. So in terms of going external, it's in the roadmap. We want to do it. But right now, it's very much nailing our solution, ensuring that we're helping people in the ecosystem. And from my perspective, it's great because I get to, it's low risk. It's affecting people in the business. And the use cases we're choosing, we have operational processes in place. So for me, it's low risk. It's good fun. So there's not the stress of going external, which I imagine there is sometimes with these particular things. I don't know if Ian, you add anything to that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I spend a lot of time talking to both consulting partners and customers. And I think there's a concern about, I know, putting an agent out on a customer-facing website. Suddenly it's not working, or there's reputational risk, there's technical risk, and I think the issue then is that's why we're not seeing as many agents being put into production as we probably like. And I think what we need is, let's think about the use case and the audience. First of all, let's pick the ones which we know will work. Employee-facing one, they'll give you feedback. You can iterate quickly. It's something, as Jack said, we already have our processes documented. We understand how that works. The next group after that let's think who's next closest to us. It's resellers. If you're in a non-profit, it's volunteers, it's donors, it's the people who are closest to us, it's partners. Then you go the next stage beyond that, which is it's our reference customers. So a really nice, easy use case for an agent would be build a testimonial.
Yeah.
Customer says, I'd love to do a testimonial, but I don't know what to write. An agent that coaches you on, asks you some questions and writes the testimonial. If it doesn't work very well, they're going to come back and talk to us about it, or they're not happy with it. Then you get into customers and ultimately get to prospects. But let's not start with prospects where they don't understand who you are. And I think I know it sounds great to go, oh, we've deployed an agent and 50,000 people have touched it. The answer is we will get there, but I don't think it's there for everybody. We don't use Agentforce. We use Intercom and Fin for our customer support. We've been using it for a number of years. We've got like 200 support articles. It's closing 80% of calls successfully. People are happy with the answer. When we could rip that out and put it into Agentforce, but it's already working well. Like if it's working, don't try and break it. We're focusing our efforts on other places where Agentforce can work. But if we hadn't had that, that's an obvious place to go. But again, you need to be quite careful about it. And I think the easier use cases are ones where to get some momentum, get your feet under okay, how does this work? And how are we going to make it work in our implementation cycle? I mean, we use Gearset. So how is Gearset going to be moving metadata around? I think we should talk about that once you've gone through that slide, Jack. I think talking through the metadata piece, talk to this in a moment, but just understanding how you go around that cycle quickly, where we are building a sandbox, it is moving to production. We got to get those disciplines right. I'll finish off with just one story. I was at a dreaming event, and people were talking about, oh, Agentforce is really hard, and we don't think we're ready for it. It's going to be really difficult, and there was quite a negative feel in the room, and I couldn't hold my tongue. Eventually, I went, okay, stop, okay. Actually, building agents isn't hard. And the whole room went, yeah, really? I went, no, it isn't hard if you've got the right disciplines in place. If you've got well understood processes, if you've got decent data governance, if you've actually got well documented metadata, and you've got an implementation lifecycle that works, okay? To date, a lot of companies have got away with not actually having that in place, but still delivering Salesforce, okay? Agents are now forcing us to do a lot of that stuff properly. Fortunately, Jack and his team have actually made sure we've had those foundations in place from day one, which means that we can build on that quickly. So I think for a lot of people, they just need to take a step back and go, okay, do we have some of those foundations in place? We can't just slap Agentforce on top of, a poorly structured org with an implementation lifecycle which doesn't work. We're just going to get ourselves into trouble more quickly. So I think some organizations need to take a bit of a step back and go, okay, have we got the right things in place, the foundations in place? And clearly both Elements and Gearset are products which will help you get those in place. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but I think that point about you've got to have some of these foundations in place to be able to take advantage of Agentforce. If you have, you can go really quickly, and we're seeing that from everything we're building.
Coming back to that agent implementation lifecycle, the design, build, and govern. So this is everything I've just spoken about prior on the previous webinar fundamentally comes down to this slide, okay? So regardless of the complexity of your use case, we are effectively doing 4 things. So you've got your diagram. This is your design. As Ian said earlier, so what? You've built a diagram. Well, what can you actually do from this diagram? So again, You've got test utterances coming in that you can put into Agent Builder. These are all generated from your diagram, the planning document. You've got your instructions. These are all coming from your textual language instructions are coming from your diagram, and you're pasting them into Agent Builder. You can generate AI generated user stories. Again, thinking about your metadata, you can start to attach these to, and you can track your dependencies, your metadata changes. Again, you can do that from the planning document, the topic diagram. So you've got your design, you've got your build, and you've got the arrow going back, which is effectively starting that governance. So if you get any unreliable responses, as I said previously, don't change your instructions in Agent Builder. You're going to iterate so many times at a rapid speed. It's going to be so important to know what you've changed, who changed it, and when. And we're doing that from the topic diagram. We have snapshots. Every time you add a box, change a line, we're showing that change in terms of governance inside this topic diagram. So Ian, so what? This thing is the planning document.
I did say at the beginning, don't develop in production, but it doesn't feel like it's very complicated moving things around. So, Lawrence, I mean, you obviously spend your time worrying about moving metadata at scale, core metadata. So I think, oh, there we go. There's a slide. Can you just talk me through what actually is having to be moved around from an agent force perspective?
I think one of the key pieces is actually what Jack mentioned earlier. A lot of the metadata that might be moving around might not just be the few extra agent force metadata specific items. It might be updates to flows. Jack mentioned that you had to change a flow type or maybe create some new ones. So not only is it these, we've got the Gen AI planner and the other Gen AI types here, which are, of course, very catchy names. But Jack, if you click, you'll also see the sort of more colloquial names of these metadatas. But Agentforce metadata is similar to other Salesforce metadata types too, in that they're all retrievable. Well, all of them at the minute are retrievable via the API, but they're also highly relational as well. So, for example, if we just try and deploy a topic that's related to some actions without the prompt templates, of course, it's just not going to work. So having tools that not only are able to understand these pieces, keep everything related to each other. Of course, it looks maybe quite straightforward, Ian, but one of the main challenges that we've seen with our customers is that with Agentforce metadata, it introduces these new unfamiliar types. So there is a bit of a learning element here. It's not fields, flows, Lightning Web Components, etc. only that we might be used to for a number of years. So there is this additional element plus relational pieces to very traditional elements that increase that complexity straight out of the gate.
And then also we talked about reuse. So this flow that you've built is part of an action, which is a Gen AI planner, but that action may be used in multiple topics. So therefore, we need to be careful about, okay, before we deploy that flow, where else is it being used? Or the worst, if a flow doesn't work and it breaks the org, pretty much you'll hear about it fairly quickly because someone in the business is going, this doesn't work. But I'm not sure what an agent would do. An agent might just go, well, it didn't work. I'll find a workaround. And you may never know. So I think it feels like we need even more governance around this than probably we had in terms of Salesforce.
Indeed. It comes to some of the bits that Jack was mentioning around testing all of the different iterations and what if there's errors as well that come in here. As you mentioned, Ian, flows, they can have error paths, etc. And it might be very difficult if that's only used, for example, by an action or by a prompt template in this example, to ever see if those flows are erroring or they have any fault paths. So you're right, the sort of governance or monitoring, or maybe the more holistic word of sort of observability of all of these agents or capabilities is arguably more important when it's not, yourself, Jack, myself, or anyone else clicking buttons. It's actually agents autonomously performing actions that we don't see on our own screens, so can't report and feed back on so easily. So it's a very important point that you raised there is around if we can reuse metadata, brilliant, but we still need that governance around it, and especially if it's new metadata.
So are you seeing people building specific flows or for agents, or are we seeing any reuse yet?
From our customers and also what we've been doing internally, it's a pretty similar to yourselves, I think, from that perspective. Best practices, of course, let's not make tech debt for the sake of making tech debt just to cut a few corners. We want to try and reuse as much of the pieces that we already have as possible, and then just iterate on them or maybe tweak them a little bit if needed to make them very much more suitable for use from an agent perspective. It might be, adding a couple more decision criteria, for example, in a flow or things like that. But mostly it's lead with try and reuse, build new if needed. And as it stands today, Jack mentioned earlier on around only some types of flows can even be referenced by, for example, prompt templates. So in those cases, you just have to, unfortunately.
But I think this comes back to my earlier soapbox point, which is if you've built good recomposable flows rather than these massive great things that look like spaghetti, that you're never going to be able to confidently deploy one of those flows because you've actually got no idea what it's going to do. So if you've had good flow design, and maybe this is for those people who are still moving from process builder workflows to flows, you need to think about also in your mind, think about how these might get reused by agents as we're moving forward. So one of the questions that's come in, which is about back to Jack, about how what we're doing in terms of instructions versus actions. So in your diagram, we're generating instructions, but the actions have got descriptions. So can you just talk about like the difference between an instruction and what you're putting in the action description?
Yeah, of course. So it's so looking at the process map. So it fundamentally comes down to the resources. So when we're generating the instruction, we're basically going. The input is like an if statement, if you like. So if this happens, then do what happens inside the box. So for example, if user asks to book holiday, the agent needs to check the request as a start date, description, and duration. Now, when we start to move on to actions as part of the instruction, so when we're generating those text instructions, it becomes, if this happens, then do the action using one of your available actions. That then goes into the agent instruction. If you've documented your action instructions correctly, thoroughly, and from the perspective of an agent, the instructions and the agent will be clever enough to go, okay, well, I need to do this, so let me go and find one of my available actions that has the correct instruction.
Hank, can I just summarize that? Let me just so make sure I'm clear. So the instructions don't reference a specific action, but they say available actions. But when you build an action, you have to put a description in the action which makes sense. But that action is going to call a prompt template or a flow. And from memory, I think the description of a flow gets pulled forward through to an action, and then you can modify it. For all of those who don't put any descriptions in, you get a chance to build one properly for the first time. But the aim again is that it should pull those instructions through. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly that. But it's a really important point, and this is something we learned the hard way. We couldn't get an action to fire. We just for whatever reason we just could not get this action to fire. So we went back, we reviewed the instructions. When you're writing your description on your flow, previously or internally, it was very much we used the how, what, why. So how does it work? What is it? And why is it there? It's description, it's documentation. If you were to use that approach, so if you were to go, this flow does X, Y, and Z, the agent will not use it. You try and use it as an instruction, but it won't actually trigger the action. So try and write the description as if it's an agent instruction. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, okay, so I mean, there's a new set of disciplines. I mean, people never used to write documentation, and now like people write a bit of documentation, but now it feels like we need to be a lot more specific. Well, we're essentially coding an application using natural language.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing.
Cool. Okay, and yeah, that's part of some of the. There's a lot of Salesforce has put in quite a lot of training material out about how to write prompts and so on. I think what we're talking about is actually put about the structure about where you're going to put some of that information once you've written it.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so this is great. The diagram I can see on the screen looks great, but there's one white box called data cloud. So that suddenly ups the ante again when we're starting to implement data cloud components. And again, there's a whole new area that we could get into in terms of, I know, DMOs and DLOs and DSOs. So I mean, I think there's a question about you can make Agentforce pretty challenging if you're not careful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this comes into some of the bits that we'll see in a minute when I sort of show you how Gearset helps with some of these challenges. But one of the, and I've just seen in the message there, Marina, is it possible to see a demo? Yeah, absolutely. We'll run you through this very shortly. I think these key pieces just sort of summarize what makes some of the Agentforce pieces challenging. And it's that new metadata that we talked about previously. But that speed of iteration and updating, as Jack's mentioned with the design, build, govern framework, this actually might be new to some people, and newness might be challenging. But because of how unique Agentforce is, Elements and the team have built this fantastic framework that helps people, rocket ship their ability to build and deploy reliable agents ultimately. But it is that iteration that might not be so familiar with other metadata types. But because of the sort of highly relational pieces, whether it be prompt templates to actions to topics, etc., or with Data Cloud, as Ian mentioned with the white box on the last slide, ultimately, if you miss any of these relational pieces, it can quickly become frustrating with the many failed deployments that Salesforce can just kick back on. And that can, of course, then require some rework. So, making sure that we catch any of those issues, whether it be data cloud issues, prompt template issues, related pieces to new flows, existing flows, any of those pieces is key. And another thing that we've heard as well is, this metadata is a bit of a hybrid of JSON, XML, and prompt markup. So for folks who aren't necessarily super familiar with what's happening in the background of this very point and click configuration, when it comes to deploying, it can be a little bit obscure, a little bit vague, a bit confusing as to what can be deployed. So it's probably where there's this, really nice hybrid of the Elements platform helping teams design and ultimately build their agents. But then you still end up with this like shipping them challenge. And as you mentioned, Ian, you don't want you certainly don't want your friends building in production. So there is then a challenge of how do we move this from the sandbox, maybe it's a dev pro, etc., that we built the agent, right through into a production environment. And I think that's where, from our side at Gearset, and I'll give a bit of a demo in a minute, ultimately we believe in these 6 core pieces as being pretty much fundamental for any Agentforce deployment solution. It's handling those dependencies. It's maybe visualizing the obscurities of this new coding language that could be in the background to some folks. It's again, identifying problems before they actually arise. Key piece Jack mentioned was around how you build on that process diagram, auditing who's changed what, when, why, how, etc. And that's not a simple thing. And don't just update your instructions straight in the agent. Using a tool that not only, like Elements, that will have those layers, but then when it comes to shipping them, maybe Jack was working on a project and shipping that vacation booker. you probably want to tie that to like a Jira or an ADO work items ticket that you're working on to prove Jack and Jack's team did the deployment because of X at the specific time. And that's of course ties into the whole auditability and back to the governance piece that you mentioned, Ian, that whole control. And we've also mentioned around these specific coding types, and how do we know that what we're building is good? How do we know it's like in line with Salesforce best practices? So having a very specific code review type process is of course key as well.
So, I mean, we have relatively little time. I think the discussion's been important, but I think for a few people, it would be nice just to, if we can, in 5 or so minutes, just show this thing in practice. So we don't need to get into lots of detail, but just the principles, if we could maybe jump into how this works.
Absolutely. Maybe Jack, if you're able to stop sharing, I'll be able to share this up for us all. So this should be making its way across from Chicago to everyone else. Okay, so what we'll see here, and for anyone not familiar, this is Gearset, and Gearset really exists to help customers get the best value from Salesforce. And when it comes to Agentforce, Gearset is helping global enterprises deploy agents quickly and reliably to fully leverage Agentforce's productivity. And the concept that we design and build our solutions is helping customers with a DevOps done right type of mindset. And that enables you to achieve Salesforce's full potential by accelerating rollouts of new and improved features like Agentforce. But crucially, I think, and it speaks to what Jack, you mentioned around earlier, it's around with Gearset, we want people to be able to ship agents and have them working well for the business, not just deploy them. So I think foundationally, although Agentforce is new, we should be building and deploying it, most importantly, like from sandboxes to production in a non-new way. So let's have a look at Gearset then. So what you'll see here is that compare and deploy is how we can move between, let's say, orgs in this example. Of course, we can include version control if we wish, if we're a little bit more mature in our DevOps processes. And this enables me to choose where I'm going to be pulling my Agentforce deployments from and then where to. And when I compare then, of course, we mentioned a few times that Agentforce introduces some new and perhaps unfamiliar metadata types. So Gearset simplifies this with a dedicated Agentforce metadata filter for the comparison. And we mentioned also that Agentforce is a mix of JSON, XML, prompt markup, etc., making it maybe difficult to fully understand what's being deployed. But you'll notice below that Gearset has comparison visualizers to cut through the noise, helping you clearly see and select only the changes that you wish to deploy. And this also avoids you overriding any critical work. But coming back to that piece that we saw with the metadata structure, of course, we've got agents, and they might have topics, and topics might have actions, and actions might have other related pieces. And I think, Jack, you mentioned around maybe having a prompt template, for example. So all of these are critical to understand, not only for the deployment, but ultimately, if you miss anything, this is going to fail just because of how Salesforce works. So Gearset's deep dependency analysis here will enable you to collect all of the relevant metadata, the topics, the actions, prompt templates, any flows related as well. And of course, Apex classes or any other metadata that might be in scope here. And we'll see here, for example, we've got the action reliant on a prompt template. Maybe I was rushing, I didn't quite understand what this is. Even when I've built my deployment package, even if I've missed something, Gearset's problem analysis will automatically detect, hey, Lawrence, this is going to break, like definitely, because you've not pulled these pieces along. So instead of having to refactor my entire deployment process, I simply go on from here, bring this prompt template along, and that will guarantee me success for my agent deployment.
So Lawrence, if I didn't do this, I've got two options, I guess: develop in production or change sets, build my change sets, or I mean, I guess there's some other deployment capability tools around there I could use. But I think for most people, they're sitting here looking at going, hang on, this feels so much easier. Well, first of all, I don't want to do it in production, but this feels so much easier than implementing using change sets.
Indeed, indeed. And I think, like, firstly, like, please don't build things directly in production. Like, please don't. Even if it's
Amen.
you build them first in a sandbox and then manually recreate them in production after in a very, very controlled manner. Like, please don't build them in production, because as we've discussed a few times, like, the governance becomes very, very challenging. You're not entirely sure, especially maybe if you're new to Agentforce. Like, let's build them in safe environments, and we're really fortunate that Salesforce give us great access to tools to be able to do that. And I think even then, if you use change sets, you will be starting on that DevOps maturity, starting in a sandbox, building your pieces, moving them towards production, maybe through a couple of other intermediate environments. But I think that's really where you'll see how Gearset can really propel you forward. It's not only having those visualizations, you'll have the dependency analysis baked in. It's just improving that DevOps lifecycle, Ian, make it reliable, speed of iteration, and just giving you confidence. And that's a key part when adopting any new technology, right?
I think that's a great point to try and draw this to a close, because you just said it's new. And I think for some people look at new and go, new's really hard and we don't want to do it. And I think about new in a different way. I think about, if you realize that you haven't got some of those disciplines in place and your senior execs are going, we want to implement Agentforce, this is the perfect thing to click onto and go, right, if you want to implement Agentforce, there are some things I need to do. I need some decent tooling. I need to work with you on some decent processes around implementation. I need us to spend time thinking about use cases. So I think this is, use Agentforce as the reason to re-engage executives at a more senior level who are typically going, well, you can just go and build this. And Agentforce is so different. There's an opportunity to change it. There's a good reason why CIOs are being engaged in Agentforce. It's not an admin being told, this can't be that hard, I've watched a video, off you go. There's a lot more involved in that, and it's a major transformation. So I think this is a great time for people in the Salesforce world particularly to step up and go, better processes, better data governance, better metadata documentation, and then fundamentally a better implementation lifecycle. So thank you for the two of you for spending time and the discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining the webinar today. If you are going to TDX, come and find us. We both have presentations and stands there. If you're not going to be at TDX, then reach out to us online. We're more than happy to talk to you.